It's Friday, the 16th of August, 2024.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
Yes, I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of TrueFans.
In the chapters today, there are changes at Libsyn. Apple want 30% of your donations, plus...
Hi, it's Joe Tanarella here, co-founder at PodEngine.ai. I'll be on later to talk about how PodEngine is an audio intelligence platform. We're audio mining podcasts at scale to extract deep analysis and insights across the world of podcasting.
And I'm Dan Meisner, co-founder of Bumper. And later, we're going to talk about the Bumper dashboard, our attempt to take some of the hassle out of podcast measurement.
See if you can guess which one of those two used to be on the radio. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout with the tools, support and community to make sure you keep podcasting, start podcasting, keep podcasting with Buzzsprout.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
James, hello. So this week, James, I just want to kick off with a little tidbit that you left. How many employees are left at Libsyn, James?
Well, I don't know how many are left at Libsyn, but I do know how many have left over the past 12 months. I have a list of 28 names. 28 people who have gone. John W. Gibbons, the interim CEO, left the company last week, but the company has yet to make any formal announcement. In fact, it's going to be more than 28 now because we've just found out that Pair Networks was sold to Your Online. Now, Your Online is a company out of Amsterdam, Schmokken a Pancake, and they own a number of internet companies, including Gandhi, who I use to get all of my domains through. So there we are. The announcement from Your Online is interesting. It says Libsyn was looking for a good and permanent home for Pair as it shifts its full focus on its podcasting activities. Libsyn hasn't actually announced the sale. I've asked repeatedly for comment. They haven't given me any comment. They bought Pair in January 2018, so they've had it for, 6 years? But obviously we don't know how much that was sold for. But yes, so lots of interesting sales and departures going on at Libsyn.
So what is their strategy? Are they going to focus on their advertising arm and that's it, James?
I mean, they're focusing on podcasting. That's very clear. They've just announced more promotions for Libsyn Ads. Libsyn Ads seems to be doing very well, 24% revenue up year on year. Which is nice. They've just also announced that they've partnered with Barometer. So Barometer are one of these brand safety and suitability companies. And Barometer will be essentially giving scores for every single podcast in Libsyn's marketplace. I thought that was across the entire podcast host, but no, it's just in their marketplace. So just the ads that they go out and sell. So they seem to be doing pretty well, in terms of the ad sales. I guess they're just doubling down on that.
So is Rob Walsh replacing John Gibbons or is he replacing Dave Jackson as head of customer education?
I think that Dave and Rob were both talking to some of the larger podcasters. So now it will be just Rob doing that. Rob was always head of podcasting relations, I think, at the company. So he will be doing that, I'm sure. I mean, my understanding is that it's going to be a slimmed down company, very much focused as the Libsyn was. And, Buzzsprout, our sponsor, is not a big company. There are not a lot of people who work there. Transistor, I think, has about 3 or 4 people who work there. So it's a tiny little company. So really, Libsyn, for them to have got rid of 28 people shows that there were probably quite a lot of fat in that organisation. So that's probably a good thing.
So will that mean that Libsyn gets Libsyn 5 finished? Will that become a finished product?
Well, they're still promoting Libsyn 4 for some of the functionality that has access to. So, my guess is they have to keep on working on the tech, but I've not seen any announcements of any new features from that company for quite some time now. Your guess is as good as mine because they're not talking to me. So, yeah.
Well, they're not talking to me and you, but they do have a podcast called The Feed. And this week they put out a episode. It's been about a month or so. And in it, they were talking about podcasting 2.0, James. I don't think they like it too much.
Oh, no, I don't think that's fair. I mean, Rob was very clear that he is not against podcasting 2.0.
We're not anti-podcasting 2.0. We're just saying there needs to be more carrot, less stick, and more reasons for the listening apps to adapt it.
Do you know what he's talking about with carrots and sticks?
Not quite. I mean, what's the incentives? I mean, is it incentives for him as a host or incentives for users? I'm not quite sure. And then when he says the podcasting apps aren't adopting it, I think he just means Apple, doesn't he? He just means Apple.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially there's, obviously Spotify isn't supporting any of it either. But it's this concept of carrots and sticks that I don't understand. I don't understand who's threatening him with a stick. And he kept on saying it in the feed this week. And I thought this was a really interesting bit of language that he used.
In the manner they tried to use a stick to get people to accept podcasting 2.0. If it is great, people will want to accept it. If they stop using a stick and start using a carrot, then maybe there would be more uptake and the road wouldn't be so long. Right?
I don't understand what he means by accept. On the rare occasion when I've chatted with Rob, I've said, how can we help you? How can we help you move things forward? He clearly sees that as being a threat and waving a stick about. And I don't fully understand that. I mean, he said a couple of different things. He said, firstly, that it's way too complicated, talking about streaming sats and everything else. And I think we all agree it's way too complicated. And hopefully we can make it easier and simpler to explain how that bit works. And TrueFans is a big part of that. But also, he has said that Podcasting 2.0, quite a lot of the features that we're trying to do with Podcasting 2.0 are also features that already exist in the RSS specification. And I would agree with him to a point on that. The images tag, for example, which I have a bit of a thing about, is a worse tag in the Podcasting 2.0 spec than one in the media namespace, which we should be using, and indeed YouTube is using. So I kind of get that. He likes the idea of the person tag as another example. But he says there's a way to do the person tag already. So this is his way of doing the person tag.
Currently, the best way to do that is in your author tag. If you're hosting with a host that actually supports the episode author tag, you should go ahead and put in all the information about your hosts, your co-hosts, your guests, your producers, comma separate them, put them in the author tag, iTunes author tag at the episode level. And that field is searchable. Now, not all podcast hosts support the iTunes author tag. Libsyn does.
The iTunes author tag isn't supported at an item level by Apple Podcasts, and it isn't supported at the item level by Spotify. It's not on their website as a supported field. So either Rob doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's trying to make a point about his company being really good at supporting something others don't. But I don't understand his attitude. His attitude appears to be, it's a new idea and I am not going to give it any credence whatsoever. And I don't think I'm alone in thinking this. In fact, I know that I'm not alone in thinking this. I don't know whether you've heard the new media show this week with Todd and Rob.
Yep.
This is from the new media show. Todd talking about the feed.
I'm just going to call a spade. Rob and Elsie over at the feed, and Rob Walsh's complete lack of even wanting to consider podcasting 2.0 and the benefits of that and poo-pooing it. Libsyn has made their bed.
Yeah, I just don't fully understand Rob's real hatred towards podcasting 2.0. It may just be that he hates Adam Curry, he hates me, and maybe that's it. And so therefore, anything that Adam wants to do, anything that I'm putting my name behind, he has a visceral dislike to, and Maybe it's just that.
Could be.
And in which case, just say that, Rob, and then we could at least understand why you're so. And by the way, I don't think it's particularly fair for Todd to say Rob and Elsie. It's Elsie was being very good in that show. It's just purely Rob. Yeah.
No, Elsie was doing a great job in trying to get an explanation across as to why people might want to use and look at value for value. And I think if you take the streaming sats part out, just for now, and just said the person tag, transcripts, chapters, those things, I mean, person and chapters can't be hard for Libsyn to implement. Okay, they've already implemented the namespace if they're using transcripts just in the same way Apple are. So it's not that they can't use it. And then I thought the funnier part was, if you do want to use it, go back to Libsyn 4 and you can hand code it. We support.
Yes, I know. Isn't that brilliant?
Oh my
Isn't
God.
That brilliant? Our new thing doesn't actually support what you want. Yeah. So you have to go back to the old thing. Yes. Anyway,
Moving on
possibly
to more positives.
Quite enough about that. Yes, and positive news, I think this is.
Now, I was very jealous this week because you got to interview Dan Meisner. Now, I'm going to say this. We've been doing this show for nearly 3 years. And in that time, I was looking back. I was thinking, what interview have you or I done that I thought would be a game-changing interview? And we've done some great interviews. But actually, hat tip to yourself and Dan, I think this interview is probably the best interview we've ever done on Pod News Weekly. For what it will deliver. For what it will deliver for the podcast industry. If people actually listen to what you and Dan say and understand the wind of change, this is a seminal interview, I think.
Well, this is all about the Bumper Dashboard, which is a brand new measurement tool. It combines podcast data from a number of different sources. And as you so rightly say, I caught up with Dan Meisner, and I firstly asked him what Bumper is.
Bumper is a podcast growth agency started by me and my co-founder Jonas Woost just 2 years ago. We exist to help podcasters, mostly enterprise podcasters, increase podcast success. And for most of the teams that we work with, increasing podcast success usually means increasing the number of people who are spending time with their shows, increasing the reach of their podcasts.
So what have you launched this week for your second anniversary?
We launched something called the Bumper Dashboard. There's this frustration that we had when we started the company around measurement, proving that a show is in fact growing. And the frustration was largely fragmentation, right? There's all kinds of really useful, strong signals of audience engagement and audience growth if you know where to look. And so for years, places like Apple Podcasts Connect and Spotify for Podcasters, and now YouTube Studio, your hosting provider, third-party analytics services, there are all these great places that you can go and check some facet of whether your show is growing, but none of them have the whole picture, right? Apple can tell you what's going on among Apple Podcast listeners, and YouTube can tell you what's going on YouTube. But Apple's never going to tell you through their Apple Podcasts Connect dashboard what's happening over in the Spotify ecosystem. So there's this fragmentation of all of this really rich, really useful data. And born of that frustration, we built some internal tools to help us wrangle all of these various data sources and create a kind of bird's eye view that would be useful, not just from the marketing standpoint, but also from an editorial standpoint.
So, I mean, I can get total download numbers from my podcast host, from the excellent Buzzsprout dashboard. Mm-hmm. I can also get my details from OP3. What is Bumper doing that I can't get from these tools?
I think they're telling part of the story, but they're not telling the entire story. And I think for years, the download has been the unit of measure for podcast success. But I think one of the things that our entire industry has woken up to, especially over the past year or year and a half, is that downloads may not be a great way to measure the reach of your show in people or to measure engagement or consumption of your show. Because last I checked, when I see a download number with my hosting provider or I see a download number in a pass-through analytics service like OP3, all I'm measuring is the delivery, or really the request for delivery of an audio file, not necessarily the consumption of an audio file.
Right. And whereas, of course, you can get from all of the dashboards out there that the platforms run, you can get total time spent listening. You can get where people were jumping in and all of that. And so you, with the bumper dashboard, you're pulling all of that data together so that you can actually see it in one place. Are you actually seeing that these numbers correlate? I know that we put this very show into the bumper dashboard, and you found a fascinating correlation in a show of ours, quite some time ago, where you could very clearly see people skipping forward to to get rid of the boring James and Sam stuff and go for an interview. It makes you feel great.
I mean, boring is in the eye of the beholder. Yes. Maybe some listeners just have more favorite and less favorite parts of your shows. No, you're absolutely right. And what's been really, really validating from the point of view of somebody who makes shows or is involved in the editorial or production workflows in a show is when this data seems to agree with itself, even when it comes from different sources. So it's that kind of triangulation of the truth that I think can be really, really helpful when you're somebody who maybe is early on in your podcast journey and you don't really know how long should my episodes be, or how many segments should I have, or where's a good place to put the ad breaks such that I don't lose lots of people through the ad breaks. How do I pull people through all the way to the end of an episode? My great love of these platforms is that they make this data available to us, but I think the challenge is you've needed to check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have clients who are checking 6 or 7 dashboards on a regular basis just so they can touch every part of the elephant.
We have so much research out there, which is survey research, which is talking to a sample of podcast listeners, saying that YouTube is now massive and it's the biggest platform since God created the world and all of that. And actually, the bumper dashboard appears to both agree and disagree with that. Certainly in terms of audience, YouTube seems to be massive, but that's not the whole story, is it?
We've had clients using the bumper dashboard for the past couple of months. We've let, of course, our clients have the earliest possible access. And we've been looking at a variety of platforms, including YouTube. And I think it is undeniable that YouTube has massive reach. We have not seen that translate into the same kinds of time spent listening, or what we like to call listen time or watch time, as on dedicated audio-first podcast apps. So I might see significantly more people starting that episode on YouTube. But when we look at the amount of time spent, YouTube, at least for the shows that we work on, tends to have lower average time spent listening or lower average listen time, significantly lower average listen time or watch time than the audio first platforms, which I think raises the really important question: should our YouTube strategy involve publishing the exact same thing or nearly the same thing as we're posting on audio channels? Or should we treat YouTube as a distinct entity where the user base or the viewer base or the listener base has a different kind of need and a different kind of consumption pattern? We're just starting to dig into this in a really fulsome way, but the early signals suggest that, yes, YouTube has lots of people, but for the exact same piece of content, like a podcast episode, we get higher average time spent listening on the audio first platforms versus the same thing posted to YouTube.
What's the business model of this? Can anybody sign up for the bumper dashboard, or is it purely for clients and it's a benefit that the clients get?
We've built this for ourselves and we continue to use it ourselves internally. And it is available for free at no additional cost to anybody who is working with Bumper on sort of a consulting basis. So yeah, it's a value add for our consulting business or our podcast growth consultancy. We don't have any immediate plans to make it pull out your credit card and sign up for an ongoing subscription, because the real value, James, I don't think is in the charts and the graphs. If you really want those, you can go and get those from all of the source dashboards. Yes. I think the value is bringing that together and in the storytelling. And I mean, just one example of this is we work with so many teams where the download story as of late has been kind of a bummer, right? As we witness the impact of those iOS 17 changes, downloads have been declining for a lot of the teams that we work with. But the really interesting part of the story is that when you look at what we would call verified listeners, the listener numbers or the viewer numbers that come from Apple, they come from Spotify, they come from YouTube. When you look at those viewer numbers, those numbers are growing. And so we've got these two things going on in parallel. We've got audience numbers as measured in people, unique people who actually hit play. Those are growing. And at the exact same time, we've got download numbers that are declining. And if your entire worldview is seen through a download-centric lens, that can lead to perhaps a misleading interpretation of your true audience size or composition. And so I think the real value is maybe not in the charts and graphs. It's in the storytelling and in the interpretation of the data, not a fancy dashboard with some charts in it.
So if people want to find out more, then I guess the first thing is 11 to 11:30 on Tuesday in the industry track stage at Podcast Movement. You'll be there and you'll be not just talking about this, but you'll be talking about the whole confusing mess of podcast measurement, I guess. So that's one thing. What's another way for people to learn more about your new tool?
Thank you for shouting out the Podcast Movement session I am running. And yes, it is absolutely not just about the Bumper dashboard. It is about how anybody, big creator, small creator, just starting or been doing this for decades, could use the data that is available in all of these different places. In addition to that, wearebumper.com is our website, and you can contact us there. You can take a peek at the Bumper dashboard. We've got some screenshots up there. Always happy to talk to people about how they can try and make better sense of all of this really rich, useful information that's available, but can sometimes feel cumbersome because, well, Judy had the login to Apple Podcasts Connect, and she doesn't work here anymore.
Yes. Dan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, James.
So there you go, Dan Meisner. Apart from my intellectual bromance with Dan, I love that we're finally getting away from downloads. Look, I've been banging this drum, you know that, for at least 18 months. I heard him also on 2 other podcasts in and around podcasting and Sound Off as well.
Yes, me too.
And
yeah.
He's consistently saying it. And what it is a download is not a listen. And when will we accept that's a true fact? The thing that you and I have talked about, because it relates very well to Pod News Daily, is a metric called % completed. And I know that Dan actually clarified that for me on LinkedIn. Because % completed along with listen time is the way. So, James, your dailies are 3 to 5 minutes, depending on whatever.
Yes.
So if it was just on listen time, yours would look awful compared to somebody who's rambling for half an hour who would probably have a greater listen time. So the % completed means a lot more. And I think that's, again, part of the metrics. The trouble I've got, though, is how does the industry get this first-party data from Apple, Spotify, and YouTube? I can't see that they're going to be opening up an API or giving OAuth access to third parties. Yes, you can get it if it's your own data from the Apple Connect dashboard and the Spotify dashboard. But if it's James Cridland who wants to do an analysis, or John Spurlock, or a third party who wants to actually gain volumes of data, first-party data is not going to be given by these apps out to third parties.
No. No, and I think that that's probably the right thing, to be honest. I think that we probably shouldn't be sharing that without podcasters' consent. Having said that, I think that podcast companies, and Blueberry has done a very good job, and I think Captivate's done a very good job in doing this, of allowing you to publish your open figures. And of course, OP3 is the daddy in this. So that you can, if you want to, just check a checkbox and people can actually see your numbers. And I am astonished that there isn't enough of that going on. But also then we need to make sure that there is an official way of doing this through Apple, through Spotify, through YouTube, through all of these services. And, what would be ideal, wouldn't it, is if there was a standard API, just as there's a standard, Google Reader API, or there's a standard Mastodon API, to all intents and purposes, a standard API for getting listen time data and verified audience data would be super useful. The Podcast Advertising Bureau should be doing that, but of course the Podcast Advertising Bureau doesn't exist. And so perhaps that would be one of the first things that the Podcast Advertising Bureau might want to do.
Now, I'm going to say it because nobody else will. True Fans has been supporting Listen Time for 18 months. Yes, we already were supporting it. Jeez, I have to say that every week, I think. But we do, and that's why Dan and I have spoken in the past, and we have talked about listen time being the metric that we want. So we built True Fans with it in from day one, and we actually, that API that you're talking about, I don't think is an API. I'm betting my shirt on it, so we'll see. But I think it's the activity stream, just as we don't have an API for podcasts to get their access from hosts. We use RSS. It's a structured piece of data. It's XML, and we all know it's open and we know how it works. The two-way RSS is going to be the use of activity streams. So I will measure your play time and your percent completed, and that will be a piece of structured XML data that you, the user, can choose to publish or keep private. And that's the data that can be shared. So that two-way RSS is the way I believe that data will be sent from the apps and aggregated from multiple apps back to their third party, who can then aggregate that all together. Yeah. I don't think it's an API as we would normally call it. It's like RSS, but Activity Streams is an XML file, which will give us two-way RSS.
Well, we'll see who ends up being right on that, I guess. Dan is speaking, as I mentioned, he's speaking at Podcast Movement, 11 to 11:30 on Tuesday. And also he's on Stephen Goldstein's panel on Wednesday, A View from the Top as well. Alongside, I think I noticed, Elsie from Libsyn.
She is.
Rob Walsh is not there, but Elsie is. Also on that panel, according to the Podcast Movement app, which doesn't list Elsie, but does list Andrew Mason from Descript, friend of the show, Ross Adams from Acast, friend of the show, and Farid Haji from the Roost podcast network, who I haven't met, so I'd like to do that.
I've got FOMO now because that's one panel I really would like to go and see. But anyway.
Well, if you buy the ticket, you can gain access. You can buy a virtual ticket and you can gain access to all of the recordings afterwards. So there is always that.
Now, moving on, James. So part one of the problem, I think, this week is download is not a listen, and how do we get listen time? Part two of the problem is how do we stop people skipping ads? Because there seems to be, and I'm one of the advocates that I don't believe people will listen to that many ads. But anyway, we will agree to disagree. But this week you wrote about a company who says that podcast ads generate nearly the same level of attentiveness as TV, and that they say 24% of podcast listeners never or rarely skip ads. I don't know how they know that. But tell me, James.
Well, I mean, they've done a decent survey to discover that. And in fact, it's interesting. Yes, 24% of people say that they never or very rarely skip podcast ads. They asked the question the other way round. who do you, where are the ads that you avoid all the time? 33% say that they avoid all email advertising. Good luck with that. 37% say that they avoid all advertising in social media and on websites. And only 25%, right at the bottom, say that they avoid all ads in podcasts. So the vast majority of people are listening to the ads, and for anybody to claim that most ads are skipped in podcasts isn't really going to be correct, I would say.
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, one of the things that Dan said to Danny Brown was he would not want to put an advert into a podcast if he couldn't be certain that it was actually being heard. And I would be the same. I wouldn't want to put money into putting ads into podcasts if I couldn't get the metrics that told me it was actually heard. And at the moment, I'm afraid, as an industry, we don't have that metric. Now, there are crazy ideas to put in, like UID2 and ID5, and there's other ways. I think you call it attribution payment.
Cost per attribution and cost per action and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I mean there's a bunch of different ways. The issue with the whole attribution thing for podcasting is that it is really hard to do because of OpenRSS. And so you have the issue that Rob Greenlee has been talking about a lot this week about be careful what you wish for, because if we want 100% coverage for listen time, for example, well, we know that Marco Arment isn't going to build that into Overcast already. So we're already saying that we'll never get 100%. Maybe you say that your podcasts will only be on those podcast apps which gives listen time and which gives proper attribution. And in which case, then we're going down a road of moving away from OpenRSS and going into the world of a proprietary app. So, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and nothing else, because nothing else will support that right now. And YouTube, of course. So it's just a worry, I think, if we go all the way down. And, let's remind ourselves, 90% of podcasts don't contain ads anyway.
That's true. So, I was listening to The Future of Podcasting with Daniel J. Lewis and the former Libsyn employee Dave Jackson. Sorry, I just had to get that in.
Yes.
They were talking about the interview you did with Micah and the podcast Blocker, which, again, in reflection, I don't think is going to work, because I think it's just a negative way of doing it. But they were also talking about the way that YouTube has demanded ad-free podcast episodes be uploaded. You can't put an ad into it. And I think Daniel was talking about a proposal where actually could you pay to have an ad-free version? I'm thinking, well, that's exactly fundamentally what Spotify does, doesn't it? If you don't pay your subscription, you get ads. If you pay your subscription to Spotify, you get an ad-free version.
That's what Apple does, obviously. Yeah. But the issue is, for most people don't really mind too much about there being ads in there, or they don't mind the hassle of skipping them. And the other issue is that, I think we do a pretty good podcast, but it's not worth $2.99 or $3.99 a month to most people. So it's that lack of, of micropayments that means that, it's just really hard to end up doing. But I would agree.
Well, not that I think it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think there is a model where you incentivize people to listen to ads and not skip. Now, that's a crazy thing to say, but the way of doing it is that the advertiser will stream sats to you while you listen, and the minute you stop listening and skip, they stop giving you sats. Now, that would give advertiser a listen time metric, i.e. James listened to 10%, Sam listened to 20%, and Adam listened to 100%. They would know that because the streaming sats would stop the minute you stop listening. And that, I think, would be a really good way to get a true understanding of who listened to the ad, how long they listened to the ad, and what they did with the ad in terms of when they stopped and skipped, or whether they clicked on it. again, I'm not going to go into detail now, but the technology is there to do it. I think it's just a little early in the market for people to adopt it.
Indeed. And talking about it from the other side, there's a bunch of data from PodScribe that came out this week, which talks about a bunch of things. It's loads of performance benchmarks and loads of that sort of thing. So lots of jargon in it. I actually talked to Amelia Kuma, friend of the show, this morning, my time actually, about some of the findings of this study. One of the findings I still don't quite believe, and that is that if you play the same ad more than twice in the same show, then the whole performance for that ad goes down significantly, goes down by half. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, from my history in audio advertising, I just do not believe that if you play an ad twice, then the overall campaign gets worse. That to me seems really weird, and I don't understand why that would ever be the case. But that's what the data says. Apparently, if you the shows advertising works very well, but it halves in performance if you play the ad twice. If you play the ad 3 times, it goes down even further, which is just really weird data. So it's worthwhile taking a peek anyway. The PodScribe performance benchmarks, you'll find it in the Pod News Daily this week.
Now, Apple, I have been going...
Oh, here we go.
Well,
strap in, listener.
Yes. This is not just me, thank God. This is a whole bunch of people in the industry. So I've called Apple a monopoly. I think the EU has called Apple a monopoly. I think many people are calling Apple's App Store a monopoly. But we talked last week about Patreon earning over $350 million a year on its platform. Well, yes. Just on the back of that, Apple decided, yes, that's too much money for you to have. We'd like 30% of that, please. So they've said that by November this year, Patreon users will have to switch over to Apple's payment system, and Apple will take 30% of Patreon's payments. I don't think that's very fair, James. Do you?
Well, so I think there's a couple of things there. If I can sit on the side of Apple just for a second, but I will, get off because it's already hot over here. But firstly, Apple has been saying this for some time, for at least the last year. So it's nothing to do with the announcement that they made, $350 million. Secondly, the issue here is only money that you pay to Patreon through the Apple App Store. So therefore, you as a creator using the Patreon app, wanting to give $10 a month to Podnews, for example, podnews.net/Patreon, then 30% of that will go to Apple. And not go to the creator. Unless, of course, I click the button that says just charge people who are using iOS 30% more. So, so it's a bit of a, arguably it is Apple being fair because everyone else has to pay the 30% tax. But also arguably it's not being fair because the money is actually coming from the creators, not from Patreon. The money's coming from the creators directly because we lose out on that. Also, if we were running an app, we could apply to Apple's small business program, which lowers that commission down to 15% instead of 30%. Now, 15% is actually not too dissimilar to the amount of money that we are paying Patreon anyway. Patreon, we pay about 8%. So it's not too dissimilar. And at least that, we understand, what the costs are there. But it's just, it doesn't look particularly good. That said, of course, Apple already takes 30% of our money. If we were to make ad-free versions of this podcast, for example, available through Apple Podcasts paid subscriptions. And there's no chance of getting the Apple Small Business Program for that either. So here in podcasting land, we've had this for quite some time, Apple taking our money. So it's just Apple taking our money through a slightly different route, I guess.
Yeah, there's two parts of the report in TechCrunch that stood out for me. One was Apple has threatened to remove creator platform Patreon from the App Store if creators use unsupported third-party billing options. And then the last bit that really stood out for me is, and this I think is contradictory to what we're going to say about Spotify in a minute, the company reminded creators that Apple's fees only apply to the iOS app, that creators continue to offer the same prices on the web and Android. And as we'll see very shortly, Apple are not applying that same ruling to Spotify.
Yes, because, there's a carve-out for music apps, I believe. So that doesn't make an awful lot of sense, to be honest. It's weird because I suppose you could argue, firstly, Apple Podcasts, for example, supports RSS feeds from paid-for services like Memberful, Supporting Cast and Supercast, and they don't get any money from those. Mm-hmm. Secondly, actually, we've got a link in our show notes that says if you want to support us, go to weekly.podnews.net. Mm-hmm. And Apple aren't taking 30% of that. And that is actually against the rules if you were to look a little bit more closely. So, I don't know. It's just a mess. And I think if you're Apple, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. They kind of have to be fair with every single app developer out there. But also, in this particular case, it means that the creators are the ones that get hurt. And I would imagine if it's happening to Patreon right now, then I would imagine that for things like Wavelake and for, any similar things, Fountain,
Podcast
yeah, exactly. I would guess that it'll happen for all of those as well.
Yeah, no, that was the point. I mean, at the end of the day, okay, Apple are trying to apply the same ruling to large companies like Patreon, but it's the smaller startups like, as you said, Fountain, Wavelake, etc., who are using micropayments. Now, we've already seen Apple remove Damus, which was a Nostr app that used micropayments because they wouldn't switch. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, and long may it last, by the way, they are not coming after podcasting apps yet. But if you have an iOS app, you're building, I think, on quicksand, because it only means that you're not on Apple's radar. But as soon as you get on their radar, you will either have to accept a 30% tax to continue doing what you do, or you'll have to try and find an alternative. Now, we don't have an iOS app at the moment, and we use an approved Stripe Apple payment gateway. So we aren't falling foul of Apple's iOS payment police. But if we build an iOS app, do I then not have the option of having within my progressive web app that capability? Or do I have to then, like Patreon, fall foul and pay 30%? And it's just one of those things now. It's juggling between users who've been Pavlovian taught by Apple. If you want an app, you go to the App Store, not that you click install for a PWA.
No, and this is, I'm sure, one of the reasons why Apple has made websites that work as apps, PWAs, so difficult to install, because this is a way around that for the creator. And, obviously Apple don't want that on their side. I mean, it's, you can look at it the other side and say that, and here's a conspiracy theory for you, because the same thing will work on Google as well. Google will turn around at some point and say to Patreon, you owe us 30% as well. Mm-hmm. So here's a conspiracy theory for you. Apple Podcasts, obviously they want to make an Android app because they're not stupid. But it's only worthwhile for the company if they can earn revenue from paid subscriptions. But Google Play, of course, has that 30% tax. So could it be that the only reason Apple hasn't launched an Apple Podcasts app on Android is because they want to avoid Google Play's 30% tax on revenue. And yes, they could build something into their website for you to be able to subscribe. But of course, that's exactly what they're trying to stamp out from other people doing. So maybe the reason why we don't have an Apple Podcasts app on Android is actually tying back into this 30% Apple tax. And that's basically it.
Well, this week, Spotify think they've got a micro win over Apple because they've...
Yeah, this is such a small win.
Yeah. They are now allowed through the EU ruling to place the price of their products. So they can now tell you the price of their premium family or duo and audiobooks. But I love this. And this is why I go back to a comment I made earlier. They are not allowed to put a link or even a text reference to the site where they can actually purchase it. So if Spotify put in, oh yes, and if you want to go and pay for this outside of Apple, you go to spotify.com, then it'll be banned brilliant. From the App Store.
Yeah, they're not allowed to do that. It's like if you use the Amazon Kindle app, and you want to try and buy a book, it just says, oh, you can't buy a book on this app.
Right.
And there are if you try searching for buy Kindle book on iPhone, there are pages and pages and pages of helpful advice from other websites showing you how you can actually buy a book on your Kindle app on your iPhone or iPad, because Apple won't even allow Amazon to say, you can, though, buy them on Amazon.com. It's just hilarious. It's just a real mess.
Moving on, right now.
You found something called PodEngine.
Yes.
Who are doing all kinds of weird and wonderful things.
Yeah, we both saw a LinkedIn post from the co-founder, Joe Tanarello, talking about they're using AI to transcribe, well, first of all, they're transcribing all of the episodes of podcasts. Then they're using AI to do audio mining and deep analysis. But one of the things he put out, which is the thing that raised my interest, was he said, oh, we're going to analyze what Podcasting 2.0 tags are in all of these podcast episodes, and then we're going to rank them for you and blah, blah, blah. And I reached out, and I know you reached out, and I thought, cool, this would be interesting. And ask him, actually, tell me more about PodEngine and tell me more about what is audio intelligence and audio mining.
So PodEngine is an audio intelligence platform. So what we're doing is audio mining podcasts at scale, and that allows us to extract deep analysis and insights across the industry as a whole, all the way down to individual episode level.
That sounds really exciting. How are you doing that?
So using our experience in computer science and a basement full of servers, as well as state-of-the-art models, as well as open source models, we are extracting, first of all, we're transcribing episodes at scale, so many thousands of episodes per day. And then through that, we're running our own pipeline of analysis. So we extract things like who's advertising, who's guesting, what's their bio, what might the audience who listens to this be interested in, the topics and themes discussed, sometimes the sentiment, a bunch of stuff. And that enables us to do some pretty cool things.
So let's take Pod News Weekly, which has been going for about 3 years. I can't believe it's that long already. What could you do with something like Pod News Weekly?
So right now, actually, Pod News Weekly is one of the podcasts that we do the deep analysis on. So if you go to PodEngine, you'll see that and search for Pod News Weekly. When you look at an episode page, you'll notice that we write a full article about the audio, which is great for accessibility reasons. As well as we highlight the key topics discussed. We're very specific with those. We elaborate on them, the key takeaways. We highlight who's advertising, if there is an advertiser, the topics discussed in a weighted fashion as well, who the guests are and their bios, a variety of information. And very soon that will all be searchable, not only in the PodEngine interface, but also through our API.
So let's break down a couple of those things. So first of all, you talked about writing an article. I assume that's the AI, not yourself and your co-founder writing an article every week for us.
Correct. Yeah. I wish I could write that quickly and at high quality.
Now, again, just because people will want to know, is it an LLM that's open source? Is it open APIs, the chat GPTs, or is it another one that we haven't heard of? What are you using?
This is a great question, and a little bit of everything is what I would say. We lean very heavily into open source. So I think I mentioned our basement of servers earlier. We actually have a basement of servers and graphics processing and everything else going on. So we do lean into open source a lot for most of our processing, but where required, we also lean into state-of-the-art models, and we use pretty much all of them for different reasons as well. So a good combination of them. And of course, we run our own transcription as well.
Now, you talked about key topic. Are they extracted by looking at the transcript, and then you talked about weighting them as well? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So we do our best to extract the topics and provide estimated weighting. And of course, this data is improving week on week at this point. Very soon we'll be tying that to Wikidata definitions as well. So to provide even more enriched data and insight.
Okay. And then lastly, you talked about the fact that you're going to be able to have a holistic view across the industry. How are you going to achieve that?
Yes, I think it's really interesting. So today, down to the episode level, as we've talked about, we can look at topics discussed, who's advertising, who's guesting, and so on. If we go up a level, then you can look at the podcast. What does this podcast talk about generally? And then we can extract trends there, and who's advertising generally, and so on and so forth. But then there's a few levels up as well. So you could look at maybe the genre level. Maybe it could be the location of the podcasters, which is some data we've started to extract. And really at any level, it could be genre, it could be anything you can search and filter by. We can provide a 360 view of that using the data that we're extracting from. Really, the lowest level is the transcript, but we bubble that back up to the top level then.
So today, from what I understand, you use iTunes similarities to abstract similar podcasts to each other. Now, we talked offline about potentially using a topic that James and I talked about, something called RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is an AI process for linking similarities, and transcripted podcasts is a very good use of that. What are you doing in that space?
Yes, correct. So at the moment, we do use RAG in a few places throughout our estate. So just as an example of that, we were sending a free kind of curation and discovery email to our users. And the way that worked was they could tell us what they cared about in terms of kind of topics. And then we would then each week look at all the transcriptions that we'd processed that week and send them the best episodes in our opinion based on those topics. That's quite a basic view. So RAG is what most people are using when they're doing things like chatbots, for example, using AI. But the graph RAG really takes it a step further because it's a way to connect similarity and identify similarity across, in our case, episodes and podcasts. If guest A is being interviewed on a certain podcast and a particular brand's being mentioned in that same context, then it makes it easier to spot the connection of those two things on different podcasts, different episodes, and so on and so forth. So yes, we're really excited to be looking at that because Microsoft, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, actually did experiment and train on podcast data when they released it.
Yeah. How does that get exposed within the application then? Is it a visual tool or is it a written tool?
So if you go to the website today, depending on when this is aired, you won't see it. But in the next couple of weeks, one of the first products we'd built based on our API, which is using all this enriched data, is a guest booking tool. So if you'd like to place yourself or a client as a guest on the podcast, our ability to surface insights and transcripts and everything else makes it much easier to hone in on relevant podcasts more quickly. And so today that works, it's great. We've had really good feedback on it and some people are migrating from other tools into ours, which is fantastic. But to take that a step further, something that people are really interested in is they spend a lot of time writing outreach emails to the podcasters, and not only more often than not, the emails bounce because not all emails in the RS is correct, but also it's very hard and time consuming to write that email. So one thing that they're really interested in is, we know the topics that they're writing about in terms of the outreach. We can look through the last 10 transcripts from a podcast and say, hey, you spoke about climate change 2 episodes ago, but actually we can find the white space as well. So you spoke about climate change in the context of farming, but actually you didn't mention this specific point. By the way, my client is an expert in that specific point. How would you like it if they came onto the podcast kind of thing? So that's an area, finding the white space.
Good. Now, one of the other example probably projects or platform services that you've built is keyword search, which is the ability for maybe James or I would want to put a tracker on our names or on our podcast. You've already built that, if I'm right.
Yes, that is live today, and we have some very happy paying users on that product. It was actually the first product we built. So initially, when we built PodEngine, we had this shiny technology. We didn't know how to surface it to paying customers or what problem solve exactly. So the first proposition was, like I mentioned, tell us what you care about and we'll give you good episodes. And we realized that whether through ego or something else, people were putting in their own names, their brand names, their competitor names into that service. And so we realized actually there's a position here for media monitoring across the podcast world. And so that's where we built the product initially. And so, yes, you can go to the website today. Everybody gets one free keyword alert, and that's across full transcripts. And so that's a product that is near and dear and close to our hearts. It's the very first one.
Now, the basis of this is transcripts, and that's what you're using as the ability to audio mine against. Now, if a podcast doesn't have a transcript today, you're transcribing that automatically yourselves, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Would you make those transcripts available to purchase for the user? So let's say I'm a podcaster, my host doesn't support the ability to create a transcript. I'd really love one. Is there a way that I could come to PodEngine and say, hey, I know you've got my transcripts for these episodes. Can I just have that as an exported file that I can use within my own RSS? Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely is possible. And that's available today. So if you go to the website today, search your podcast, and if it's being transcribed, which is quite likely, then you'll see the transcript there. And if you log in, you can just download it. If it's not there, then shoot me an email and I'll be very happy to start processing it for you. We've actually had a lot of interest from podcasters because a lot of the problems that I think we're able to solve weren't really feasible to solve pre this world of LLMs and tech at scale. And so we've been asked to provide a number of other areas of functionality for podcasters. So for example, if you go to an episode page, you can chat with the episode in a kind of chat GPT-like manner. So we're going to provide that to podcasters to embed into their own websites as well. And along with that, they'll get extra analysis that they don't get today. So what questions are people asking of the podcast? And even on PodEngine, when someone searches for technology, for example, like, is your podcast, which is about technology, is that showing up? If so, alongside which other podcasts? So yes, we're building a proposition for podcasters today. And very soon we're going to formalize that and bundle it up. And at the moment, we're taking feedback from podcasters on what would you love to see? So knowing that we have this technology and the sky's the limit, what would you build with our tech? And yeah, that's our approach today.
Okay. Now, one of the things you mentioned was an API, which is the way that my developer would be able to use to access some of this information. When do you expect to have the API available for developers to get stuck in?
So we're actually onboarding customers at the moment, and some of the use cases coming over to us are really interesting. And like anything, when you're speaking to customers, you learn and you move forward with things. Just as an example of that, while we're on the topic, we're working with I can't say who, but a US listed consulting company, and they're looking to extract insights about the sentiment around the social housing market pre and post UK change into a Labour government, which is obviously extremely niche. Having started to look into this area for them and with them, there's actually a significant amount of discussion happening on that very topic. Another example is a pilot that we're about to run with somebody who's looking to identify climate change misinformation across the podcast world. So who's misinforming people and what can they do about that, really? Yes, the API is being used by us in production, and from September onwards, we're going to start to onboard more customers into that.
Excellent. Joe, this sounds super exciting. If I want to go and find out more about it, where do I go?
Head on over to PodEngine.ai/podnews and you'll get 50% off your first month.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Sam.
The Pod News Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Let's jump around the world then very quickly. Firstly, iHeartMedia releasing their financial report for quarter 2 24. Podcast revenue up. Yay! Podcast revenue up less than it was last year. Boo! A slight slowing of growth. It's only up by 8.1%. That said, up by 8.1% when most of your company is an AM/FM broadcaster. They must be delighted with that. So many congratulations to them. And Bob Pittman saying a very interesting thing. Our leadership position in podcasting is, in part, the result of the power of our broadcast radio assets. Essentially, he's there saying, we advertise the heck out of the iHeartRadio app and out of the podcasts that we have. And that's one of the reasons why we are so successful in terms of this.
Now, in North America, James, the Hollywood Reporter announced the most powerful people in podcasts. So I thought, I'll go and have a look, see if James is in there. You're not in there, James, for some reason. But there are two Brits. But
of course I'm not in there. I don't live in the US.
Well,
that's what's going on there.
So who was in the list that anyone might know?
Oh, I mean, two Brits that have moved to the US, Ross Adams and Steve Ackerman. They were in there. But it's sort of a strange old list of some people like Greg Glenday from Acast or Ray Chow from Vox Media. Very senior business people. But then you've got, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, or you've got Joe Rogan. And, they're not, they're different, aren't they? they're talent,
yes.
not big execs. So a little bit confusing, I found all of that.
I think it's the intern. Go and find 24 people to put on the list so we can put a PR release out. Yes, that's what it was.
I think there was a little bit of that. My favourite bit was when they were talking about, they made another story because they asked everybody, what do you think about listening to podcasts at over 1.5 times speed? What I loved about the results is that Julia Louis-Dreyfus had no idea what somebody was talking about, or thinks it's really trendy to swear, because she said, what the F is that? But then you got, people saying, I used to believe this was true psychotic behavior from Greg Glenday. Somebody else, Bill Simmons, said it's for sociopaths. And the definitely not psychotic or sociopathic Ben Shapiro says that even 2 times might be too slow.
Wow.
Who knows what's going on there? But yes, it was a strange old list. But I'm delighted to know that there are no powerful people in podcasting outside of the United States. So well done, the US again.
John McDermott, friend of the show, did say in his own personal blog about it. Personally, I'd argue James Cridland is more powerful than some of the celebrities on this list. So there you go.
Well, that's very kind of you. In South America, Spotify is basically killing podcasting, according to a long piece. Very interesting. What they basically say is that Spotify piled loads of money because Spotify is essentially the monopoly in South America, Latin America. 90% of consumption to podcasts happens on Spotify. And so lots of podcasters followed the Spotify money, and that was brilliant. And now, of course, Spotify is spending nothing on it. And all of a sudden, all of the podcasting corporations in Latin America are finding it very hard going because the biggest part of the company has pulled out. So that's not a good thing.
In your backyard, James, in Australia, Triton Digital have their podcast ranker. I'm off for a coffee. Tell me more.
You don't like this podcast ranker, do you?
Boring. Because it's the same people at number 1 every week.
It's the same people. Hamish and Andy still there at number 1. And it's very difficult to do a proper month-by-month comparison because, months aren't the same. 15% more weekdays in August than July. So therefore, monthly comparisons really don't work that much. The only thing that you need to know is that everybody's number 1, Sam. ARN's iHeart, number 1 publisher for listeners. The ABC is number 1 publisher for downloads. And Southern Cross Austereo's listener is number 1 sales representative. So trebles all round. And in the US, talking about things that stay the same, Edison Research revealed the top 50 podcasts in the US, which is a decent list. It's measured by a survey, so every podcast gets measured. It's whatever somebody says that they listen to. No change in the top 3. The Daily at number 3, Crime Junkie at number 2, and Mr. Rogan at number 1. I did a little bit of research into where all of these things were hosted. 24 shows are hosted on Megaphone, 9 on Simplecast. 24 shows, that's 50% of the top 50 hosted on Spotify's Megaphone. That's a pretty impressive thing.
Podcast events on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Where are you off to next?
Now you say, where am I off to? Where are you off to next, Sam? Are you coming to Podcast Movement 2024? Because we've been saying time and again on this podcast, and you've been saying, I might have something to say in a week or two.
Yeah, no, I won't be at Podcast Movement 2024, sadly. I do have FOMO. There are people and events there I would love to listen to, but I can't justify it. I'm in the middle of closing a round of funding, and so, we don't have the spare cash. And there is a Podcast Standards Project meeting where there will be a discussion point around me. So we'll see what comes of that.
Yeah, it's an expensive thing. Once you tot up the hotel, I paid $118 just so I could check in early.
I'll be in the Windy City with you, James, in Chicago, the next one.
In the site of the Trump Tower, no doubt.
Will it be the Trump Tower still by then?
Anyway,
let's not
who knows?
Get into that. Let's not get into that.
Who knows? One other conference that you might want to consider coming to is the 2024 International Radio and Audio Conference. It's part of a set of conferences in Venice, in Italy, in early November. This year it'll have a podcast session too. I know this because I'm doing it. So that'll be the reason why. Anyway, tickets are now available for it. It is essentially if you can think of a conference which is just full of Tom Webster and Pierre Bouvard, then that is essentially the conference that this is. It's everybody who is everybody in terms of research. So I always feel like the stupidest person there. They asked me to do the opening keynote, and I actually said no, because I said I feel too stupid. So no. But yes, very good, and I would heartily recommend it. That is linked, as are many others, at podnews.net/events.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology.
So Podscribe is the latest company to now have IAB 2.2 compliance.
Oh.
I would get excited, but I can't. But there you go. Well done, Podscribe.
Well done, Podscribe. Headliner doing some smart things, collaborations with Canva. And also an AI-powered text-to-video tool. So you can basically say, I would like an image of a small dog holding an ice cream, and it will give you one. So, which is nice.
Have you seen our friends over at X who've released their Grok 2 AI text-to-video tool, and it's been producing pictures of Kamala Harris with guns. They've been producing Obama smoking cocaine, Taylor Swift very, very skimpily dressed. No guardrails at all on Grok 2. None at all.
Well, there you go. There's Elon Musk for you. Audio Audit is an interesting tool. I think this is an interesting tool, not if you make a podcast, but if you are the boss of a podcast network, you're looking after 30 or 40 different podcasts, and you just want a little bit of a glimpse into whether all of them sound okay, whether they're all loud enough, whether there are any big gaps in them or whatever. Audio Audit will basically let you do all of that sort of thing. Yeah, and you basically go to the website and you say the name of a podcast that you want to check, and it goes and checks them and tells you whether or not you're any good. AudioAudit.io, which is quite a smart thing.
Now, Blueberry is also has an AI image editor coming out. It's a clip editor. It's in beta, according to Todd on his show. And thank you, Todd Cochran. Blueberry have finally supported the alternative enclosures. So now, in the same RSS feed, you can get both the audio and video for both Geek News Central and New Media Show. So if you listen to either of those shows and you want to switch simply between audio and lean back to video and then go back to audio, it's in the same feed now. You do not have to have a separate feed and switch to a separate podcast.
Anycast Plus, that's out. It's a note-taking, translating podcast app, which is quite neat. I quite like the idea of translating. That seems like quite a smart thing. The weird thing is, though, that it also adds an AI chat function, so you can ask what your favorite podcast host thinks about things. Jordan Harbinger's done something like this for the last year and a half or so, but interesting seeing Anycast doing it for basically any show. So theoretically, it will, you'd be able to say, what do James and Sam think about, whatever, and it'll tell you. So, so that's very smart. Tell me about Albi. Very quickly.
Yes, Albi. Yes, very, very quickly. So the Albi Hub, which we switched to in True Fans, is working very well. The company's just announced, though, that it will cost $12 a month to companies to run that now. And again, I fully understand. They've got to make money somewhere along the line, this company. Otherwise, guess what? They'll go to the wall. So they're starting to give out free wallets. I think it's called Uncle Sammy in or something, or some weird Americanism. But basically, you can run wallets for other people if you run an Albi Hub. And yeah, good luck to you if you want to run it for $12 a month. It works, but I still find it overly complex.
Nothing is going to go wrong there. I had good fun over the last week. I say good fun. Installing Tailscale on my Umbrel so that I can get hold of it wherever I am in the world, because I have a feeling I'll need that next week. And also Tailscale into my Home Assistant. Gene Bean, this is all your fault. So I have a nice Home Assistant green, and that has Tailscale in. And what that essentially means is a couple of things. Firstly, that I can turn the garage lights on and off wherever I am in the world. Right. Slightly less than useful.
Spook the wife.
But secondly, it also enables me to VPN back through my home network back out into the world, which might be useful in terms of hotels and things. So it's a smart little tool. So I've been playing around with that. Alitu has added 5 new Podcast 2.0 tags, which is nice. They've added episode, locked, person, season, and transcript. You see, locked. This is where I agree with Rob Walsh. Locked is just an utter waste of time. Utter waste of time. It doesn't stop anything from happening.
No, it doesn't.
But anyway, so well done, Colin, and the team there. I wonder if they'll be at Podcast Movement. I'm sure that they will be. And what else we got? Pocket Casts is adding the ability to rate podcasts on the next version of its apps, version 7.7, both iOS and Android. Interestingly, you need to listen to 2 episodes or more, and you actually need to listen to at least half of those episodes each.
I agree.
For you to be able to vote.
I fully agree.
Quite nice, which is very smart.
Yeah. Apple, you don't need to listen to anything, just to rate it. I think Spotify, it's 10 seconds, and then you can rate it. And I think that's pretty poor on both counts. I think, if you really want to give something a rating, at least give it a proper listen. And I think well done to Ellie and the team at Pocket Casts.
Yeah, I think that's very good. I actually did play with Pocket Casts this week. And I thought, this is pretty good on the iPhone, isn't it? So I was there thinking, do I continue with Overcast or do I start using Pocket Casts? But I'm using Overcast for now.
And finally, just because we had the interview with Matthew Passy last week about his NFC-based watch that you're going to be using at Podcast Movement, and a few other people have one as well. Apple have announced that they're going to, in iOS 18.1, allow people to use the NFC for transactions on the iPhone. So they're opening it up to third parties, which I pinged Matthew with. Of course, there will be associated fees if you do so.
Yes, of course there will be, because, of course, they want you to use Apple Pay, your card, your bank card, because Apple earns from every single time you use Apple Pay. So, of course, they won't want to give that away for free. In the same way that my bank has in the Android app, which is just brilliant. My bank has its own NFC thing. So if you go to a store and you want to pay using my bank card, then either I can just put my Android phone on the scanner and away I go, or I can open the bank's app, navigate all the way through and find the cards, and then I can pay a slightly different way through NFC, which doesn't change the cost that I pay at all, but means that the bank doesn't have to pay Apple. Imagine how few people use that. Yes, but there we are. And one final thing, Blueberry. If you were listening to the new media show, Todd ended up saying that Blueberry is undergoing an IAB audit for 2.2 compliance, as most people have to do. And so it's just nice hearing that he's ending up doing that.
Boostergram.
Boostergram Corner
On the Pod News Weekly Review.
Well, yes, you can wait hours for a bus and then 5 come at once. It's the same with us and boosts. We got no boosts last week. We got loads of boosts this week, which is really nice.
Boomy from Alby sent us 2,500 sats. Thank you, Boomy.
Yes, Andrew Grummett, 2,222 sats, The Row of Ducks. For Pod News Daily, he just wrote cheers. So cheers to you, Andrew.
John Chidley sent 10 sats, which he basically hearted the Pod News Daily. And so, yeah, by doing so, he sent you 10 sats.
Yeah, the Pod News Weekly Review. He hearted this very show. John is based in Brisbane, and I've still not met him. Yes, so thank you for him, and thank you, Sam, for operating TrueFan, so that I got that. Similarly, I think this is John McDermott from earlier on, who has sent 10,000 sats. Here's the sats I wanted to stream from the beach. All right, show off, but forgot to switch apps. He says. So thank you for the 10,000, and thank you also the 10,000 from Adam Curry with an incendiary idea here. Just a thought, he says, if Spotify don't care about our industry, which we were saying last week, then our industry should not let them come into our conferences. If the conferences don't care, then we should not go to the conferences that host their important people only entry. Not so sure.
Well, basically, I think what Adam is saying is if Spotify is a closed shop, which it is, and it doesn't allow people to come into the rooms unless you're important, then why should we let them at these conferences? And sadly, Adam, I tend to agree with you, but the conference organisers like the moolah that Spotify provide them, and they would not turn that money away, I'm afraid.
I am very happy if Spotify wish to subsidise podcast movement to the tune of however many thousands that they are subsidising it by. I'm very happy to completely ignore what Spotify is doing. That said, I've got a meeting with the folks at Spotify, but I don't know if I'll be in the exciting room.
What with champagne and caviar? No, you won't be.
With the caviar and the free flowing, milk chocolate.
Yeah, you're just press. You're not advertising. No, you won't be given any of that.
No, I'm absolutely convinced.
Cold coffee.
I did notice that my meeting invite says in the location tab, to be decided. So, yes, bless him. Gene Bean, thank you, 2,222 sats. Bravo, Sam, he says, for ditching X. Mm-hmm. You haven't really ditched it there, have you?
I am. Okay, so and I'll tell you exactly. Well, I've announced when I'm leaving, which is next week. And there's a reason why it's next week and not this week, which you'll hear at the end of the show. But yes, I am leaving. I went through every morning, like most people, I was doom scrolling through and trying to see what was there. No bit of useful information on X this morning at all. And it hasn't been for weeks now. I'm just like, I'm not missing it. I'm on Threads and I'm on Mastodon, and I'm getting tons of value back from those two platforms and zero.
Well, good old Mark Zuckerberg. Who'd have thought that we'd ever say that?
Well, yeah, but they've announced on the 28th of August now that Threads API developers will have all of their content also federated. So, again, they are pushing forward. So good luck to them.
Very, very slowly. Anyway, Gene Bean carries on. I wish more people would acknowledge that X is a dumpster fire and leave. And Danny Brown, a man who keeps on posting onto Twitter and doesn't seem to post onto his Mastodon account. Anyway, he says something that I wish I could read, but I don't understand Scottish. What does it say?
Hoping Descript gets Scottish accents right in a future update.
Ah, that's what it says.
All I'd say to every Scottish friend is 11. 11.
Voice recognition technology in a lift in Scotland. They don't do Scottish accents.
11. Could you please repeat that?
11.
11. 11.
11.
Could you please repeat that? Please speak slowly and clearly.
11.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Also, curly whirly. Thank you also to Cy Jobling, who has become, he said some very positive things about us on Mastodon over the last week, and he's become our new power supporter. He's part of the Magnificent Seven, as I'm going to call them, while we have seven. So the Magnificent Seven, who are giving us around $5 each every month, and it goes onto a website, so therefore Apple will not be getting 30% of this. Cy Jobling, Rachel Corbett, Dave Jackson, Mike Hamilton, Matt Medeiros, Marshall Brown, and Cameron Moll. I saw Rachel Corbett being quoted in the Daily Mail a couple of days ago because she's very, very popular on the telly, and so and so she ended up saying something about this sainted Australian breakdancer, and I think jumped to her defence. And why not? So thank you all so much for that.
I just saw a brilliant meme, though, where they showed the Australian breakdancer dancing, then they cut to a cat rolling on the floor and said, I think the cat did better.
Stop it. I don't really understand enough about that one to really fully understand what on earth is going on. Anyway, let's move on. What's happened for you this week, Sam?
So, talking about leaving Twitter, yes. So we have our new ActivityPub server. It's going live in beta today. And so you will be able to, if you want, James, have an account, and every user will have an account, james@truefans.social. So you will be able to publish your activity from TrueFans to your ActivityPub client. So the outbox is TrueFans and your inbox is your TrueFans account. Sorry, your ActivityPub TrueFans account. So we have basically got the server live. As soon as that is publicly live, which we hope next week, I will leave Twitter because I have no further need for Twitter. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Am I? Well, there we are.
So we're very close.
Yes. Well, that's exciting. You've got a stats counter.
Yeah, one of the things that people have asked us for is I just want to be able to see while I'm playing how much I'm actually spending. So what is in my wallet currently? How many sats per minute am I actually spending on this episode? And therefore, every minute we do a recalculation for you so that you can see how many sats you've streamed and how many sats you've boosted. So you will know as you listen what you're actually spending.
Well, there's a thing. And all kinds of other things as well, including a hover card and various other exciting things. Reminds me that I need to update my person picture in your system somehow. So I will go and do that at some point.
Indeed. James, what's happened for you, or what's going to happen for you?
Well, yes, it's been a week of thinking, I suppose I better do that before I leave. Yes, and then I'm off on Saturday evening. Nothing's going to go wrong here. So we're going to the local pub or the local bowling club, as it is in reality. We're going there in the afternoon to celebrate my wife's birthday. There will be beer and wine drunk. And then at 6:00, I leave the bar. And I get into an Uber and I go and do a 14-hour flight to LA. So nothing's going to go wrong there at all.
You'll just sleep the whole way. You'll be fine.
So we will see. Well, we'll see if my upgrade comes through. So that should be fun. I have also been invited to go and speak at the Dubai Podfest this year. So Todd Cochran was there last year, and it's my turn this year. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I will have been on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for the previous 7 days. So quite what kind of state I'll be in, I don't know. But anyway, very much looking forward to spending a little bit of time in sunny Dubai as well.
You won't be drinking there, so it's fine. You're okay.
You will be if you're in the right hotel. Yes, you will be.
Oh, right, okay.
So,
knowing my luck, I'll pick the wrong hotel and get 10 years in custody. But yeah.
No, Dubai is all fine for that sort of thing. It's
is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the other places which are a little bit more entertaining. I was talking to one of the organisers there, and she was saying, is it going to be your first time in the UAE? And I said, I'm in your airport about every 2 months, but I last spoke at a conference in Dubai in 2007. So I'm quite looking forward to going back. I'm imagining it'll have changed a bit. So that should be good. And that's it for this week. If you enjoy the podcast, the newsletter is better. You can find that at podnews.net, the Pod News Daily as well, wherever you get your podcasts. There are longer interviews in the Pod News Extra podcast as well.
You can support this show with sats. You can give us feedback using the fan mail link in our show notes, or you can send us a boostergram.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use CleanFeed for our audio, and we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Start podcasting. Keep podcasting.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.